Hello everyone, today we are going to review the results of the 3-card blind main event tournament for June. Before we jump into things, I did want to cover a quick change that is represented on the website and will also be part of this video. In the past, pods were labeled with letters to indicate their relative elo. The trouble is that this community has been growing pretty steadily, and because of that, those letters didn't have much meaning between months. Group A was always the highest elo pod, but beyond that, the meaning of a pod like Group D was different on a month-by-month basis, depending on the number of players who were participating and the typical elo of those players who were participating. For example, back in August of 2023, this community was a lot smaller and Group D was the lowest ranked group. As of last month, Group D included some of our mid to high elo players. So for this reason, I have changed the naming convention for pods to reflect how we actually place players into those pods. Novice pods include our brand new players who hadn't played in the main event yet. Aspirant pods include all experienced players who have below 1500 elo. Contender pods include experienced players who are at 1500 elo or greater. And finally, we have the exemplar pod, which includes the top 25 ranked players that participated within that month. My hope is that these changes will set clear milestones for players to hit that want to track their progress, as well as offer some additional context for those of you who are watching the videos as to what parts of the meta affected different ranks. Alright, now that I've covered these changes, let's talk about the meta that unfolded in June. This month there were 282 participants, 91 of which were brand new players to the event. So if you're a new player watching this video, thank you for trying the format, and I hope to see you again in the coming months. Among the 282 submissions, we saw 187 unique decks played. Now, if we weigh these decks by their performance and run them through the Simpsons Diversity Index, we will see that relative to last month, there was a decrease in strategic diversity. Now, to many of you who haven't been following this event or YouTube channel for a particularly long time, those two scores might look very similar to each other, but that is a nuance of how the Simpsons Diversity Index behaves with samples that include very high variety among the species, or in this case, decks that are part of that sample. This is why I also provide a 3-card blind diversity grade, which is scaled to match our expectations for this event off of the Simpsons Diversity Index. And that grade for this month was a C-, compared to last month's B. To provide some more context here, this is the lowest diversity score we have seen since July of 2023. As we dive further into things, it'll become increasingly more obvious that there was a diversity problem this month. The most popular card this month was City of Traders at a popularity of 31.21%. This in itself is an extremely alarming statistic. We haven't seen this sort of popularity since back when Black Lotus was legal. And even in Black Lotus's final month, it still had shy of 30% popularity. And to add to this concern, City of Traders had a whopping 60% average score. Our second two most popular cards this month were Disruptor Flute and Idol of False Gods. And now the story is starting to piece itself together, because these 3 cards, City of Traders, Disruptor Flute, and Idol of False Gods, were the most popular deck this month as well. This deck is extremely effective and has very few bad matches, and it is possibly the main driver for why this meta was so homogeneous. I think now would be the appropriate time to jump into talking about our winners. And among our winners, there were only 6 unique decks despite us having 12 pods of players. So let's start off with the boogeyman of the format, which is the City of Traders, Disruptor Flute, and Idol of False Gods deck. Hobo Joe 455 and Speedy Boost came in first in Aspirant 1 with this deck. Skooma came in first in Aspirant 3, and Descrewed came in first in Novice 3. While we're here, I think it's worth mentioning that the ugly stepsister version of this deck did win a pod. Mago came in first in Novice 2 with City of Traders, Disruptor Flute, and Steel Overseer. This version of the Disruptor Flute deck performed a little bit worse on average. However, the Idol of False Gods version of this deck wasn't present in Novice 2, so the Steel Overseer version was more than sufficient for Mago to claim that first place position in their pod. We did have one other example of a more fringe deck coming in first in a pod, which was in Novice 3, tied with Descrewed, and that was Demo Tihei, who was playing Chancellor of the Forge, Dwarven Hold, and Pyrokinesis. In a meta that was otherwise dominated by pretty much all of the same decks, this was a breath of fresh air and a callback to more of the classic 3-card blind that existed before Modern Horizons 3 came in and turned everything upside down. Our next deck to cover is Felia Exuberant Shepherd, Remote Farm, and White Orchid Phantom. Pokemar came in first in Contender 4 with this deck, and Yum Yum 36 came in first in Aspirant 2. This deck had a significant part in the meta because it is one of the few decks that can win both on the play and on the draw versus the City of Traders Disruptor Flute Idol of False Gods deck. Regardless of which card Disruptor Flute names, both of these threats are capable of dealing with Idol of the False Gods. White Orchid Phantom can destroy City of Traders, which cuts Idol of False Gods off of the mana that it needs to activate and produce those tokens. And Felia can deal with Idol of False Gods because when Felia attacks, before blockers can be declared, Felia can exile those tokens so they are unable to block. And once the idol begins to accrue a threatening number of counters, Felia can easily reset the idol back to 0 counters with that same exile effect. And now we can finally talk about the other deck that inflated the score and popularity of City of Traders, which is Scion of Draco. In Contender 1, we had a 4-way tie between Adam the Pig, Exidium, Plattert, and Walthrus. And in Contender 2, we had a 2-way tie between Applesauce and CK. Contender 3 was also won by the Scion of Draco deck by iPulsin. Novice 1 had a tie between Flobby18 and Soren Markov, and in Novice 4 we had Ruth Bader Gathering, who decided to be clever and unique by submitting Crystal Vein instead of City of Traders. The cost of a spell is locked in at the time that you declare you are casting it, so Scion of Draco doesn't update its cost to reflect the fact that Crystal Vein is gone. It is a strange rules nuance, but it does in fact work. I do feel like I should point out that Crystal Vein does introduce a couple of vulnerabilities that City of Traders doesn't have. For example, Crystal Vein can't both pay for Scion of Draco and handle Tabernacle at the Pendrell Vale, but those specific circumstances didn't come up, so it turned out not to make much of a difference. The reason we see Scion of Draco winning so much, and the reason it's so popular, is that it was positioned very well to deal with the changes in the meta. As a matter of fact, if we jump to our Exemplar pod, which is our top 25 ranked players that played this month, 9 copies of the Scion of Draco deck tied for second place. This is the most of a single deck we have ever seen present in one pod. It shouldn't surprise you then that our first place winner overall in our Exemplar pod was Agender Apricot, who was playing Dryad Arbor, Force of Despair, and Grief, which is a deck that perfectly deals with Scion of Draco by getting through Hexproof with Force of Despair. At the highest elos of 3-card blind, we see a lot of players using similar methodology to decide what deck they're going to play. That, combined with the fact that there were a few decks that were positioned to perform much better than the rest of the meta, is why you saw such strong convergence to certain strategies, especially at the higher ranks. Agender Apricot just happened to be one step ahead of the rest of the folks in Exemplar Pod and planned around there being an overprevalence of Scion of Draco as a reaction to the rest of the meta. This has resulted in Agender Apricot becoming our new champion with a whopping 1895 ELO rating. And with that, I'd like to offer congratulations to all of our winners one more time and move on to discussing which cards will be part of the community ban vote. Let's start things off with City of Traders, which is part of this list because of its high popularity combined with its strong performance. There is no doubt in my mind that other cards contributed significantly to City of Traders' popularity and performance. That being said, I would like to see a return to Ancient Tomb, which has a more meaningful drawback inside the 3-card blind format. I think the cards that City of Traders can cast contribute more significantly to the diversity problems we saw this month, but I don't think that the problems would have been nearly as bad if we had Ancient Tomb as the go-to soul land instead of City of Traders. Next on the list we have Idol of False Gods, which was part of the Boogeyman deck that really upset the meta this month. It was the 3rd most popular card this month, and it had an impressive 66% average score. The fact that it can produce blockers for you every turn while working its way towards becoming a significant threat makes the card very powerful. Now, to be fair, I do want to mention that aside from its combination with Disruptor Flute, Idol of False Gods had a relatively mediocre performance. But I do think that its similarities to Retrofitter Foundry, which is a card that has been banned for some time now, make it a card that would be scary to remain legal even if Disruptor Flute was banned. On a related note, Disruptor Flute was our 2nd most popular card this month and also had a 66% average score. Unlike Idol of False Gods, we saw Disruptor Flute paired with many other different cards, and it performed reasonably well across most combinations. I personally would like to see both Disruptor Flute and Idol of False Gods receive bans, but if you're on the fence about banning both of these cards, I do think that there's a lot more compelling evidence that Disruptor Flute is going to be disruptive to the meta even if Idol of False Gods goes away, so I think if you're going to ban just one of them, it should be the Flute. Next we have Scion of Draco, which again was a card that performed extremely well, especially at higher elos where it became more and more prevalent. I think it might be easy to blame the success of Scion of Draco on some of the other cards that entered the meta from Modern Horizons 3, but I do think that it's worth mentioning here that we also recently banned Energy Field and Dark Depths, which were 2 strategies that were historically major obstacles for Scion of Draco, and those are no longer part of the meta. I think that Scion of Draco's over-prevalence in Exemplar League was truly damning. I don't think that there's really any possible way to interpret this as a situation where Scion of Draco can remain legal and also be healthy for the meta. And the final card on the list is Felia Exuberant Shepherd. This is a bit of an odd one because Felia's strongest performance was in combination with White Orchid Phantom, which was another card that the community seriously looked at as being a possible option to vote on for bans. These 2 cards together performed particularly well because they were able to overcome that monstrous threat of Idol of False Gods plus Disruptor Flute. Of the 2 cards, however, Felia did have a stronger performance overall, and banning both of them seems like overkill because I suspect that the reason that they performed well in the first place is because they were positioned well to deal with Idol plus Flute. I think that there's reason to believe that if Idol and Flute are gone, that Felia probably won't be as big of a problem, but we saw such a big diversity issue this month that we really want to be wielding that ban hammer aggressively, so that is why Felia is part of this vote. And as we wrap things up here, I'd like to remind everyone that supporters of this channel will be able to participate in the unban vote that runs in parallel to this ban vote. I'd also like you to know that I am traveling for the next week, so if you are looking for updates on the ban vote outcomes, I would recommend you join the Discord where I will be giving the updates in a more timely fashion. Thanks for watching everyone, and see you soon.